"We're implementing a strategic realignment, and your position has been eliminated," Marcus said with a dismissive shrug. Leaning back further into his plush leather chair. His tone was clipped, almost bored. "Thanks for everything, Grandma Abby." The casual cruelty of the nickname, one I'd heard muttered behind my back but never directly to my face, stung more than the words themselves. I sat across from him in his spacious corner office, the air suddenly thick and hard to breathe, stunned into silence. The official confirmation of Chloe's completed training program, a document I'd meticulously prepared, felt suddenly heavy and cold in my hands. Despite the warmth they'd held moments before, I had just finished presenting it to him, outlining the progress made. Feeling a genuine sense of pride that I'd successfully mentored the young intern over the past intense 4 months. This, apparently, was my reward: immediate, unceremonious termination. "Today is your last day," he continued smoothly when the silence stretched, clearly unmoved by my shock. "Human Resources has prepared your final paycheck and severance, 3 weeks' pay." 3 weeks. My name is Abigail Hayes. I'm 58 years old. After 10 years pouring my heart and soul into my role as the Senior Regulatory Specialist at Nexus Architecture and Planning here in Port Charles, I'd just been fired. 10 years. A decade spent meticulously ensuring every complex permit was navigated correctly, every critical deadline was met, every potential regulatory hurdle anticipated and cleared for this firm. All of it reduced to a humiliating 3-minute conversation on a bright Friday morning. Strategic realignment? I finally managed, my voice surprisingly steady, a betrayal of the tremor running beneath my skin. The same week we officially secured the final go-ahead for the $42 million Riverfront Plaza project, a project heavily reliant on permits I personally steered through the city bureaucracy. Marcus had the decency to look momentarily uncomfortable, fiddling with the knot of his expensive silk tie. Just for a second, a flicker of something, guilt? Annoyance? Crossed his face before smoothing back into corporate indifference. "It's about leveraging new perspectives, Abigail. Chloe will be taking over your responsibilities now that you've so thoroughly completed her training." He emphasized thoroughly with a slight, unpleasant smirk. "Her grasp of digital tools and social media outreach brings a fresh dynamic we need." Chloe Bishop, the 23-year-old intern I'd been patiently guiding since March, the one I'd painstakingly taught the intricate dance of city regulations, the nuances of contractor negotiations, the labyrinthine permit application process specific to Port Charles, the one who, despite her recent degree in urban planning, possessed zero real-world experience in navigating the political and practical complexities of development but cultivated thousands of followers online with stylish photos of building models. "I see," I said, the words tasting like ash. I gathered my composure around me like a shield, refusing to let him see how deeply this cut. "Will there be a transition period?" My professional instincts kicked in despite the personal blow. "The Riverfront Plaza project has several critical permits still pending final sign-off with the Bureau." "That won't be necessary," Marcus replied swiftly, already glancing down at his smartphone, dismissing my concern and my expertise in one breath. "You've done an excellent job training Chloe." He stressed excellent at this time, the condescension clear. "She's completely up to speed on everything." My stomach tightened. I doubted that profoundly. 4 months of shadowing me, however diligently, couldn't possibly replace 10 years of hands-on experience at Nexus, let alone the nearly 3 decades I dedicated to this industry before joining the firm. The specific relationships, the hard-won trust with city officials, those couldn't be transferred like a software license. But arguing felt futile, pointless. He had already made his decision. This was a performance, not a discussion. "Human Resources will assist you in clearing out your desk," Marcus added, pushing himself to his feet, a clear signal that our meeting, my career here, was definitively over. "We've arranged for security to escort you from the premises by noon." Security escort? The words hit me like a physical blow. As if I, after 10 years of unwavering loyalty and documented success, might suddenly turn rogue, steal staplers, sabotage the very files I had meticulously built and maintained. That final, gratuitous indignity somehow burned hotter, deeper, than the firing itself. It transformed shock into a cold, simmering rage. Thank you for the opportunity, Marcus, I said, rising from my chair with a poise I didn't feel, meeting his gaze directly. My voice was level, betraying none of the turmoil inside. It took every single ounce of my self-control not to unleash the torrent of words I truly wanted to say. Not to tell him precisely what I thought of him, his strategic realignment, and his insulting severance package. As I walked numbly out of his office, the heavy door clicking shut behind me with unnerving finality, I saw her, Chloe, waiting near the reception desk, a picture of feigned professional concern poorly masking an undeniable flicker of triumphant excitement in her eyes. She knew. Of course, she knew this was coming. Perhaps, a sickening thought surfaced, she'd even helped orchestrate it, leveraging her youth and fresh perspective. In those private meetings with Marcus I hadn't seen. And in that precise moment, as the crushing reality of my situation, jobless, discarded, insulted, fully sank in, a cold resolve settled over me. I wouldn't fight this on his terms. I wouldn't scream or cause a scene. I would simply leave, head held high. What Marcus, what Chloe, what Nexus didn't know, couldn't possibly comprehend, was just how messy, how truly ugly this strategic realignment was about to become for them. 2 hours later, the small cardboard box containing a decade's worth of personal history from my desk sat heavy in the trunk of my car. I slid into the driver's seat, the familiar worn leather a stark contrast to Marcus's chair, and finally allowed myself a moment to breathe. To truly process the whiplash of the morning. 10 years of dedication, expertise, and unwavering commitment. Ended with a strategic realignment, Grandma Abby, a paltry 3 weeks severance. And the humiliation of a security escort out the door like a common criminal. My professional life hadn't always been centered at Nexus architecture and planning. For the majority of my career, I'd honed my skills at larger, more established firms within Port Charles's competitive development sector. But 10 years ago, during the sharp downturn following the housing market crash when layoffs were decimating the industry, Marcus Thorne, younger then, perhaps slightly less arrogant, had actively recruited me. He needed my specific, hard-earned regulatory expertise. We need someone who truly knows how to navigate the permitting bureau, he'd said back then, earnest and persuasive. Someone with established relationships, someone they trust at City Hall. And he was right. Those relationships, cultivated over decades of diligent, ethical work, had been absolutely crucial to Nexus's trajectory. They were instrumental in transforming the firm from a struggling 5-person studio on the brink of irrelevance into one of Port Charles's most promising and successful architecture firms. The Riverfront Plaza project was the culmination of that growth. Their most ambitious venture yet, a $42 million mixed-use complex poised to redefine the city's downtown riverfront landscape. I'd personally invested months, countless hours, meticulously securing the preliminary approvals. Leveraging the goodwill and trust I'd painstakingly built with key contacts at the bureau. Individuals I'd known and worked with professionally for decades. So, I hadn't minded, not really, when Marcus asked me to train Chloe. New talent is vital for any company's future, and frankly, I've always found satisfaction in mentoring younger staff. In passing on the knowledge gained through experience. For 4 solid months, I had patiently, thoroughly, explained every arcane form, every non-negotiable deadline. Every unwritten rule and bureaucratic nuance that often makes the critical difference between a project languishing in red tape and one moving successfully toward completion. The real trick with the City Development Permitting Bureau, I'd confided in her just last week, sharing a piece of invaluable intel, is to get your submissions logged on a Tuesday afternoon. Leonard Finch reviews the major applications on Wednesdays, and believe me, he's far more receptive and less prone to nitpicking than the Thursday review team. Chloe had nodded eagerly, taking meticulous notes in her sleek tablet, asking insightful questions that suggested a genuine desire to learn. I'd been genuinely impressed by her apparent diligence, her quick grasp of complex procedures, her seeming eagerness to absorb everything I could teach her. I'd even found myself defending her to colleagues who grumbled about her constant presence on social media during work hours. She's young, I'd reasoned, perhaps naively. It's a different generation. But she's smart, she's working hard, and she's learning fast. What I hadn't seen, what I'd been blind to, were the closed-door meetings with Marcus, the shared lunches that stretched longer than usual. The subtle ways she positioned herself as the innovative, tech-savvy future while cleverly painting me, the woman teaching her everything she knew, as the outdated, old-school past, resistant to change. I turned the key, the engine humming to life, but didn't immediately shift into drive. The parking garage felt strangely quiet, empty. Instead, I pulled out my phone, my fingers slightly trembling as I scrolled through contacts and dialed my daughter, Olivia. Mom? Is everything okay? Aren't you supposed to be at work? Olivia answered, surprise evident in her voice. It wasn't usual for me to call mid-morning on a Friday. Not anymore, honey, I replied, and despite my best efforts, my voice finally cracked, the dam of forced composure breaking. I was fired today. What? Fired? Why? Olivia's reaction was immediate, a mixture of shock and fierce indignation, instantly protective. I took a deep breath and explained the whole humiliating episode, the abrupt, strategic realignment, the insulting 3-week severance. The elevation of the very intern I'd poured my energy into training, the final insult of the security escort. Mom, that's blatant age discrimination. You have to sue them. Olivia exclaimed, her voice sharp with anger on my behalf. Maybe, I said softly, carefully signaling to exit the oppressive concrete confines of the Nexus parking garage and blinking against the sudden sunlight. Maybe I can. But Olivia, I'm not entirely sure a lawsuit is my first, or even my best, course of action right now. What do you mean? Olivia asked, a note of suspicion creeping into her tone. She knew me, perhaps better than anyone. She knew that quiet tone often hid a calculating mind already at work. Nothing specific, I replied, aiming for an innocent lightness I didn't feel. I need some time to think. To process everything. What I really needed to think about, however, was not just processing the shock and hurt, but formulating the most effective, most impactful way to remind Marcus Thorne and Nexus architecture and planning of precisely what, and who, they had so foolishly, so arrogantly thrown away. That evening, the familiar comfort of my kitchen felt different, quieter. I sat at the table, a steaming cup of chamomile tea untouched beside my laptop, the events of the day replaying in my mind. The initial shock had subsided, morphing into a deep, simmering anger, an emotion I rarely indulged but now felt fully justified in embracing. This wasn't just about the loss of a job, the sudden disruption of my routine and income. It was about the sheer, blatant disrespect. The callousness of the dismissal. The degrading implication that after a decade of dedicated, expert service, I was nothing more than obsolete equipment. Easily discarded and replaced by a younger, cheaper model. With deliberate clicks, I opened a specific folder on my hard drive, one I'd maintained with meticulous care for years. Apex Permitting Solutions LLC. Inside were encrypted digital copies of every permit application, every submission record. Every hard-won approval I'd secured for Nexus projects over the past few years. My eyes focused on the subfolder labeled Riverfront Plaza. Here lay the crux of the matter, the critical detail that Marcus, in his arrogant rush to implement his strategic realignment, and Chloe, in her youthful eagerness, clearly didn't understand. What they hadn't bothered to learn, or perhaps conveniently forgot, was that securing permits for major developments in Port Charles wasn't simply a matter of filling out standard forms and submitting them through the usual public channels. 3 years ago, facing mounting backlogs and overwhelmed by the complexity of large-scale projects, the Port Charles City Development Permitting Bureau had quietly approached me directly. They needed help streamlining their process for major developments, a way to ensure thoroughness without getting bogged down. Leonard Finch, a senior reviewer at the Bureau whom I'd known and professionally respected for over 20 years, trusted my integrity and unparalleled understanding of the regulatory landscape. He knew I understood the intricacies from both the developers and the city's perspective. Together, Leonard and I had carefully developed a solution. I established Apex Permitting Solutions LLC, a specialized consulting firm. Through a formal agreement with the city, Apex would serve as an official liaison and pre-vetting entity for developers undertaking significant projects. The arrangement was mutually beneficial. The City Development Permitting Bureau got a reliable, expert point person who ensured applications were complete, accurate, and compliant before they even hit the official review queue, drastically reducing their workload. Developers participating in the program got their crucial permits processed far more efficiently, saving time and money. And I gained an additional income stream, plus the security and autonomy of owning my own specialized business on the side. Nexus knew about Apex. Of course, they knew. In fact, my ability to leverage this unique arrangement was one of the primary reasons Marcus had been so keen to hire me 10 years ago. It gave Nexus a significant competitive advantage. What they had apparently failed to grasp, or perhaps simply chose to ignore in their haste to replace me with the younger, cheaper Chloe, was that Apex Permitting Solutions LLC wasn't just some passive pass-through entity or a mere extension of my role at Nexus. It was a legally distinct company with formally documented authority within the city's expedited permitting process. And critically, for the massive riverfront plaza development, all the essential complex permits, the ones whose timely approval was non-negotiable for the project's viability, had been filed and processed under Apex Permitting Solutions LLC's official oversight. Final approval required my unique digital signature, linked directly to Apex, embedded within the Bureau's secure system. Without me, Abigail Hayes, president of Apex Permitting Solutions, those permits were effectively frozen. Stuck in limbo, I slowly closed my laptop, the faint hum of the machine a counterpoint to the racing thoughts in my head. I picked up the cooling cup of tea and took a slow sip, considering my options. Option 1, I could sign off on the pending Riverfront Plaza permits as a final professional courtesy. Allow Nexus to proceed without interruption, despite their deplorable treatment of me. That would be a nice thing to do. The path of least resistance. Option 2, I could remind Marcus Thorne, Chloe Bishop, and the entire leadership at Nexus architecture and planning of the precise critical value they had so carelessly discarded when they decided I was expendable. My phone buzzed softly on the table, startling me. A text message from Olivia. Mom, please don't do anything rash. Promise me you'll talk to a lawyer first. Just to know your options. A small smile touched my lips despite the anger still churning inside. My daughter really did know me too well. She knew my calm exterior often masked a mind already plotting several steps ahead. Okay, honey, I typed back. I promise. And I meant it. A lawyer was the next logical step. But rash? No, what I was contemplating wasn't rash at all. It was strategic. The next morning, Saturday, I contacted Isabel Moreau. Isabel wasn't just any employment attorney, she was one of the sharpest legal minds in Port Charles, specializing in employment law, and also, thankfully, a close friend since our university days. We met later that morning at her quiet, impeccably organized law office downtown. Bypassing the casual setting of a cafe for a more focused environment, the scent of old books and fresh coffee filled the air. They can't just fire you like that, Abigail, especially implying it's because of your age with that Grandma Abby comment. Isabel stated firmly after listening intently to my account, her expression a mixture of professional outrage and personal concern. Her pen tapped rhythmically against a legal pad. Proving age discrimination definitively can be challenging, requiring clear evidence of bias, but the circumstances here are highly suspect. Especially replacing you with the much younger intern you trained. I appreciate that, Isabel, and maybe we'll explore that angle later, I replied, leaning forward slightly. But right now, I'm more interested in the immediate situation regarding the permits filed through Apex Permitting Solutions. I explained the arrangement with the city, the distinct legal standing of Apex, and the requirement of my digital signature for the Riverfront Plaza permits. Isabel's sharp eyes lit up with understanding, a slow, knowing smile spreading across her face. She stopped tapping her pen. "Ah," she said softly. "I see exactly where this is going." "Brilliant." She leaned back in her chair. "Let me be unequivocally clear, Abigail. If those permits were filed under the authority of Apex Permitting Solutions LLC, a separate legal entity, and your digital signature as principal of that company is required for finalization as per your agreement with the City Development Permitting Bureau, You are under absolutely no legal obligation to provide that signature without appropriate, separate compensation for Apex's services. And if Nexus simply assumed, wrongly, that Apex's services were implicitly covered under my employment contract with them? I pressed, needing absolute certainty. That, my dear friend, Isabel said, her smile widening, would be their critical, and potentially very costly, mistake. Especially since your consulting work was formally established and documented as a separate business entity before this project's critical phase. And they were aware of its existence and function. Do you have all the documentation? The Apex Incorporation papers, the agreement with the City Bureau. The specific Riverfront Plaza filings under Apex's name? I nodded, thinking of the meticulously organized digital folder on my laptop back home. Everything. Perfect, Isabel declared, picking up her pen again, no longer tapping but poised to write. Then let's not waste time on lengthy discrimination battles right now. Let's draft a clear, concise letter to Mr. Thorne. We will outline Apex permitting solutions, position and its non-negotiable terms for completing the regulatory compliance services for the Riverfront Plaza project. As I drove home from Isabel's office, navigating the familiar Port Charles streets, a strange sense of calm washed over me, settling deep in my bones. The anger hadn't vanished, but it was now channeled, focused. For the first time since hearing Marcus's smug, dismissive, strategic realignment, Grandma Abby, I felt powerful again. I felt in control. Monday, I suspected, was going to be very, very interesting. Monday morning dawned bright and clear, a stark contrast to the storm brewing professionally. My phone began buzzing shortly after 8 a.m. with a predictable flurry of missed calls and increasingly agitated text messages from Nexus, first from HR, then directly from Marcus. I calmly ignored them all. Instead, I savored my morning routine with deliberate slowness, a proper breakfast, the challenge of the Metro City Gazette crossword puzzle, and even an hour spent tending to the early spring bulbs pushing through the soil in my small garden. The sun felt warm on my back. It was the first Monday in 10 years I hadn't spent under the harsh fluorescent glare of the Nexus office. And I was determined to relish the unfamiliar freedom, the quiet defiance of simply not being available to them. At precisely 10:15 a.m., my phone rang again. This time, the caller ID displayed a number I recognized immediately, the direct line for the City Development Permitting Bureau. It wasn't Marcus or anyone else from Nexus. It was Leonard Finch. I let it ring twice, took a centering breath, and answered. Abigail. Leonard's voice sounded relieved, slightly stressed. Thank goodness I reached you. We've got a bit of a situation here regarding the Riverfront Plaza permits. Nexus submitted an urgent request this morning for final approval sign-off, pushing hard. But everything critical is filed under Apex Permitting Solutions. He lowered his voice slightly. I told young Ms. Bishop, quite firmly I might add, that the system physically requires your Apex digital signature for validation. I can't proceed without it. Yes, Leonard, that's correct, I replied calmly, keeping my tone professional and even. Apex Permitting Solutions is the official liaison entity for that project under our agreed-upon expedited process. There was a pause on the line. Right. Well, Nexus is saying you're no longer involved with the project. He sounded hesitant, clearly uncomfortable being caught in the middle. Something about a restructuring? My employment with Nexus Architecture and Planning ended on Friday, I explained matter-of-factly. However, Apex Permitting Solutions' contractual involvement with facilitating these permits through the Bureau is an entirely separate matter. Another pause, longer this time, as the implications sank in for Leonard. Ah. I see, he said finally, the understanding clear in his voice. Well, Abigail, this certainly puts the Bureau in an awkward position, though frankly, it sounds like Nexus created it. The city cannot proceed with the final approvals on the expedited track without your Apex sign-off. Nexus is insisting, rather forcefully, that we bypass that requirement. That's not actually possible under the specific terms of Apex's agreement with the city, is it, Leonard? I asked gently, already knowing the answer but wanting him to articulate it. No, Abigail, it absolutely is not, Leonard confirmed, his tone firming up now that he understood the landscape. The expedited process we established relies explicitly on Apex's verification. It's built into the system protocols. Without it, Nexus would have no choice but to withdraw the current applications and resubmit everything from scratch through the standard non-expedited channels. And realistically, Leonard, how long would that take? I inquired innocently. Leonard let out a short, dry laugh. For a project of Riverfront Plaza's complexity and scale? Going to the back of the standard queue? You know the backlog we have. Months. 6 months at an absolute minimum, maybe longer. Plus, naturally, they'd lose their current priority slot entirely. The silent satisfaction I felt was immense. 6 months minimum. That would likely derail the entire project timeline and budget. After thanking Leonard for the information and assuring him I'd handle communication with Nexus regarding Apex's role, I hung up and checked my phone again. 3 more missed calls from Marcus. The latest voicemail, left just minutes ago, was markedly different in tone from his earlier, more demanding messages. Gone was the arrogance, replaced by a distinct edge of barely concealed panic. Abigail, look, I think there may have been a misunderstanding regarding the transition. His voice stammered slightly. Can we please connect to discuss the Riverfront Plaza permits? It's rather urgent. The plea was thinly veiled. Call me back as soon as you possibly can. A small, cold smile touched my lips. The panic was unmistakable. He'd finally realized. He, or someone, had finally understood that firing me wasn't just removing a salary line, it was severing the project's lifeline. Precisely at noon, an email arrived from Isabel. Attached was the draft letter she'd meticulously prepared for Nexus architecture and planning. It was perfect. Professional, impeccably firm, and crystal clear about Apex Permitting Solutions' position. Apex Permitting Solutions LLC would be pleased to provide the necessary consulting services to complete the final permit approval process for the Riverfront Plaza development. This service would be rendered upon receipt of a signed consulting agreement and payment of a fee totaling $90,000. This figure represented approximately 9 months of the salary Nexus was no longer providing me, plus a reasonable premium for Apex's specialized, indispensable service. Furthermore, the agreement required formal, prominent credit for Apex Permitting Solutions LLC as the lead regulatory compliance consultant on all official project documentation and public announcements. I reviewed it carefully, nodded in satisfaction, and sent Isabel my approval. She sent the letter electronically to Marcus and Nexus's legal counsel immediately. Marcus's response arrived in my inbox within 5 minutes, a hastily typed, almost incoherent email demanding, not requesting, demanding, that I call him immediately for an urgent discussion to resolve this matter. He completely ignored the clearly stated terms. I archived the email without replying. Instead, feeling lighter than I had in days, I drove to my favorite local nursery on the outskirts of Port Charles. I spent a peaceful afternoon selecting vibrant tomato seedlings and fragrant herbs for my garden. The scent of damp earth and green growing things a welcome antidote to the morning's tension. I was carefully examining the sturdy stems of Brandywine tomato seedlings, contemplating their future placement in the sunniest part of my garden, when my phone rang again. This time, it was a number I didn't recognize, a corporate exchange, not a personal cell. Curiosity piqued, I answered. Hello? May I speak with Ms. Abigail Hayes? The voice was male, deep, and carried an unmistakable air of authority. This is Abigail Hayes speaking. Ms. Hayes, this is Julian Vance. My breath caught. I nearly dropped the tomato seedling I was holding. Julian Vance. The Julian Vance? Founder and CEO of Vance Properties. The primary investor, the financial powerhouse behind the entire $42 million Riverfront Plaza project. A man known throughout Port Charles and beyond for his shrewd business acumen, his deep pockets, and his absolute intolerance for delays and incompetence. Yes, Mr. Vance? How can I help you? I kept my voice calm, professional, betraying none of the sudden acceleration of my pulse. I understand there appears to be a significant issue with the permits for the Riverfront Plaza project, he said, his tone direct. Cutting straight to the chase, yet not unfriendly. Businesslike. Marcus Thorne at Nexus seems to be having considerable difficulty explaining the situation clearly. Frankly, his explanations are raising more questions than answers. He paused, letting the implication hang in the air. I would appreciate the opportunity to meet with you directly, Ms. Hayes, at your earliest convenience. To understand precisely what is happening with my investment. I didn't hesitate. Of course, Mr. Vance. I would be happy to meet with you. We agreed to meet the following morning at his downtown headquarters. The imposing Vance Properties building overlooking the very riverfront the Plaza project was intended to transform. When I returned home later that afternoon, invigorated by the unexpected turn of events, I found an email from Chloe Bishop waiting in my personal inbox. How she got my personal email address, I wasn't sure. But it was yet another boundary crossed. The subject line read simply, "Please help, urgent." The message itself was a bizarre, tone-deaf mix of pleading and condescension. "Abigail," it began, dropping the formal Ms. Hayes she always used in the office, "I know you must be upset about the strategic realignment. It was a shock for everyone. But holding up the Riverfront Plaza project like this is really only hurting your own professional reputation in the long run." My jaw tightened as I read on. "Please try to be reasonable and just sign off on the permits so we can all move forward. Marcus is under a lot of pressure. I'd be happy to make sure your name is included somewhere in the acknowledgements section of the final project report." Acknowledgements? A footnote? After being unceremoniously fired, insulted, and replaced by her, she honestly thought a mention in the acknowledgements, somewhere, would suffice? That it would appease me? The sheer naivety, the utter lack of understanding of the gravity of the situation, was almost breathtaking. I deleted the email without a second thought, refusing to even dignify it with a response. And went back to sketching out the layout for my revitalized garden. Tomorrow's meeting with Julian Vance, CEO of Vance Properties, promised to be far more interesting indeed. Tuesday morning, I dressed with meticulous care for my meeting with Julian Vance. I selected an elegant, sharply tailored navy blue suit, a classic piece I rarely had occasion to wear in the more casual environment of the Nexus office, but which felt appropriate for meeting a titan of the Port Charles business world. Power dressing, but understated. I arrived at Vance Properties' sleek, imposing downtown headquarters a deliberate 15 minutes early. The lobby, all polished granite and hushed efficiency, exuded wealth and influence. I was immediately greeted by an assistant and escorted not to a waiting area, but directly to a spacious, sunlit conference room. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic vista of the riverfront, the very site where the stalled Riverfront Plaza project was meant to rise. It was a subtle but powerful reminder of what was at stake. Julian Vance entered precisely at the agreed-upon time. He was a tall man, likely in his mid-60s, with a full head of silver hair and eyes that seemed to miss nothing. His reputation for blunt speaking and decisive action preceded him. He shook my hand firmly, his grip surprisingly strong. "Ms. Hayes, thank you for coming on such short notice." His voice was resonant, commanding respect without needing to raise its volume. "Coffee?" "Yes, thank you," I accepted. As his assistant quietly served us from a silver carafe, Mr. Vance wasted no time on pleasantries. He got straight to the point. "I have currently invested $12 million of my own capital into the Riverfront Plaza development," he stated, his gaze level and intense. "Phase 1 funding is secured based on projected timelines." He paused, letting the weight of the number settle. "Now, I learned less than 72 hours ago that the entire project is effectively stalled, dead in the water. Because Nexus Architecture and Planning inexplicably fired the one individual, you, who apparently holds the key to navigating the city's permit labyrinth." His voice remained calm, but a distinct edge of displeasure underscored his words. "I am not pleased, Ms. Hayes. Not pleased at all. I understand your frustration completely, Mr. Vance, I replied, meeting his gaze steadily. Please, call me Julian, he said, leaning forward slightly, his focus entirely on me now. I've been making some inquiries since this situation came to my attention late Monday. His eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. It appears your termination wasn't just unexpected or poorly handled, it was strategically catastrophic for the project timeline and, frankly, possibly executed in a manner that exposes Nexus to significant legal liability. I raised a single eyebrow, acknowledging his assessment but saying nothing, letting him continue. Tell me about these permits, Abigail, Julian continued, switching easily to my first name. Thorne claims it's merely a minor administrative hiccup, a simple paperwork issue that you are leveraging because you're bitter about being let go. The skepticism in his voice was palpable. I opened my laptop, which I had placed ready on the polished table, connecting to the secure Apex server. I brought up the digital trail of the Riverfront Plaza permits, the initial complex applications filed under the Apex banner, the preliminary approvals meticulously documented, the pending final clearances flagged in the Bureau's system, all clearly routed through Apex Permitting Solutions LLC, requiring my specific digital authorization. 3 years ago, Mr. Vance, Julian, the City Development Permitting Bureau approached me, I began, keeping my explanation concise and factual. They were struggling with major project backlogs. We collaborated to establish this formal liaison arrangement through my company, Apex Permitting Solutions, to streamline the approval process for qualified large-scale developments. It benefits both the city and the developers. Nexus was fully aware of this arrangement, I continued. In fact, my ability to utilize this expedited Apex channel was a key factor in their winning the Riverfront Plaza bid and a significant reason they recruited me 10 years ago. But apparently, I added, allowing a touch of dry irony into my tone, in their recent strategic realignment. They seem to have overlooked the fact that Apex Permitting Solutions is a legally separate entity from my former employment at Nexus. Or perhaps they simply didn't grasp the operational mechanics of our agreement with the city. Julian studied the documents displayed on my screen intently, his sharp eyes scanning the official agreements and digital workflows. He asked several pertinent, insightful questions, demonstrating a quick grasp of the regulatory complexities. And let me be perfectly clear, he summarized after a few minutes, leaning back slightly. Without your digital signature, as president of Apex. On these final approvals, the Riverfront Plaza project cannot legally move forward under the current permits. That is correct, I confirmed. Nexus would be forced to withdraw everything and restart the entire application process from square one, through the standard, much slower public channels, which, according to my sources at the Bureau, would likely take months. At minimum, 6 months would be optimistic, according to Leonard Finch at the Bureau, I clarified. I see. Julian tapped a thoughtful rhythm on the tabletop with his pen. His expression was unreadable for a moment, then seemed to solidify into decision. And you sent Nexus formal terms, through your attorney, for Apex to complete the necessary permit processing? My attorney, Isabel Moreau, sent them yesterday, yes. Outlining a consulting fee for Apex's services, plus appropriate professional credit for your company's work. Reasonable terms, in your professional estimation, he probed. $90,000, I stated clearly. Which represents roughly 9 months of the salary Nexus was no longer willing to pay me for performing essentially the same critical function. Plus a standard industry premium for specialized, time-sensitive consulting. And yes, prominent recognition for Apex Permitting Solutions as the lead regulatory compliance specialist on all project documentation. Julian nodded slowly, absorbing the information. And their response thus far? A frantic email demanding I call Marcus Thorne for an urgent discussion, I replied. Nothing substantive addressing the actual terms proposed by Apex. Typical Thorne, Julian muttered, a flicker of disdain crossing his features. He fell silent for a moment, his gaze distant as he clearly weighed his options. Then, he made his decision, turning back to me with renewed focus. Ms. Hayes. Abigail. I dislike inefficiency. I detest incompetence. And I absolutely refuse to have a multi-million-dollar investment held hostage by the poor judgment of others. He paused, meeting my eyes directly. Therefore, I'd like to make you, or rather Apex Permitting Solutions, an offer. One that bypasses Nexus architecture and planning entirely. This was unexpected. Far faster and more direct than I had anticipated. I kept my expression carefully neutral, masking the surge of surprise and, yes, vindication. I'm listening, Julian. Vance Properties would retain Apex Permitting Solutions directly, effective immediately, for the entire duration of the Riverfront Plaza project. We will meet the consulting fee of $90,000 you proposed to Nexus. Furthermore, we will implement a bonus structure tied directly to meeting key regulatory milestones ahead of the revised schedule we will need to create. Crucially, you and Apex would report directly to my executive team here at Vance Properties. You would not be operating through Nexus in any capacity. I took a steadying breath, processing the magnitude of his offer. This wasn't just about getting paid, it was about being recognized, valued, and empowered. And Nexus's role moving forward? I asked, needing clarity on that point. A cold, almost predatory smile touched Julian Vance's lips. That, he said softly, is a matter currently under strenuous review between Vance Properties and Nexus. He leaned forward again, his voice dropping slightly but losing none of its intensity. But let me be frank, Abigail. Given how profoundly they have mismanaged this critical phase, jeopardizing the entire project through sheer arrogance and short-sightedness, I am actively reconsidering our entire relationship with Nexus architecture and planning. I left the Vance Properties headquarters an hour later with a firm handshake agreement and instructions for Isabel to expect the formal contract from Julian's legal team that afternoon for her review. The swiftness, the decisiveness, it was exhilarating. As I walked towards my car parked several blocks away, enjoying the crisp spring air, my phone buzzed with an incoming text message. It was from Marcus. Emergency meeting Riverfront Plaza today 3 p.m. sharp. Nexus boardroom. Your presence is requested. Consultation fee for your time will be compensated. Too late, Marcus, I thought, a grim satisfaction settling within me. Much too late. When I arrived back home, I found an elaborate, almost obscenely large flower arrangement sitting awkwardly on my porch. Tucked amongst the roses and lilies was a small card, penned in Chloe Bishop's looping, youthful handwriting. So terribly sorry for any misunderstanding, Abigail. Please call Marcus ASAP. We really need you. Chloe. The cloying sweetness of the flowers suddenly felt nauseating. I picked up the entire arrangement and carried it next door, placing it on the porch of my elderly neighbor, Mrs. Gable. Knowing she genuinely loved flowers and would appreciate the gesture far more than I ever could. Then, I went inside and immediately called Isabel to brief her on the astonishing offer from Julian Vance. He's offering to retain Apex directly, Isabel, I explained, trying to keep the excitement from my voice. Matching the $90,000 fee we proposed to Nexus, plus performance bonuses tied to milestones. And here's the kicker. He's talking about retaining Apex not just for the Plaza project, but potentially for all Vance Properties developments in Port Charles for the next 2 years. Cutting Nexus out entirely? Isabel let out a low, appreciative whistle. Abigail, that's not just a development, that's a coup. Did Mr. Vance give any indication about what this definitively means for his ongoing relationship with Nexus? He said he was reconsidering it, but his tone. Isabel, I got the distinct impression that Marcus Thorne has some very serious explaining to do. And Julian Vance is not known for his patience. I imagine he does, Isabel replied dryly. All right, send me the contract the moment it arrives from Vance's lawyers. I'll review it with a fine-tooth comb. Her voice turned warm. In the meantime, I strongly suggest you continue your policy of benignly ignoring Nexus's increasingly desperate attempts to contact you. Let them sweat. I spent the rest of the afternoon happily immersed in my garden, carefully planting the tomato seedlings and herbs I'd purchased the day before. There was something deeply therapeutic about digging in the rich soil, carefully settling the young plants into their new homes. Imagining the bounty they would eventually yield, it felt like a perfect metaphor for this unexpected, tumultuous new chapter in my professional life, planting new seeds for future growth. Right after being so abruptly, carelessly uprooted, by Wednesday morning, the Port Charles development community, being the tight-knit echo chamber it is, was buzzing. News, or at least strong rumors, of my sudden departure from Nexus and subsequent direct engagement with Vance Properties regarding the stalled Riverfront Plaza project had spread like wildfire. My phone vibrated constantly with calls and messages, concerned inquiries from former colleagues at Nexus likely prompted by a panicked Marcus. Tentative feelers from other developers sensing an opportunity, and even a call from a curious reporter at the Metro City Gazette. I politely deflected them all, referring substantive inquiries to Isabel. Marcus Thorne's desperation, meanwhile, escalated to almost comical levels. First came a formal email from Nexus's HR department, CCNG Marcus, offering Apex Permitting Solutions an immediate consulting contract for the Riverfront Plaza permits, at twice the rate Isabel had initially proposed in our letter. A transparently panicked overpayment. When I, following Isabel's advice, didn't respond within the hour, Marcus bypassed HR and left another voicemail directly on my personal cell. The carefully controlled tone from Monday was gone, replaced by raw, unfiltered panic. "Abigail, please, for God's sake, we need to talk." His voice was strained, higher pitched than usual. Vance is threatening to pull Nexus from the Riverfront Plaza project entirely. He's talking breach of contract. This could ruin the firm. Abigail. Ruin me. There was a pause, a shaky breath. Whatever you want, Abigail. Just name your price. We can renegotiate your severance. Hell. You can have your old job back. With a significant raise. Please, just call me. The naked fear in his voice, the complete reversal from Friday's smug dismissal, was almost satisfying enough to erase the sting of strategic realignment, Grandma Abby. Almost, but not quite. The satisfaction was tempered by a cold awareness of the professional consequences he now faced due to his own arrogance. Around noon, Isabel called with an update, her voice brimming with professional satisfaction. "Abigail, Vance's legal team just sent over the formal contract for Apex Permitting Solutions. I've done an initial review." She paused for dramatic effect. "It's exceptionally favorable. Significantly better terms than anything Nexus could possibly cobble together now. Even in their desperation." "How so?" I asked, settling into my favorite armchair, ready for the details. "For starters, Abigail, it's not just for the Riverfront Plaza project anymore," Isabel explained. "Julian Vance wants to retain Apex Permitting Solutions as the exclusive regulatory compliance consultant for all of Vance Properties development projects within the Port Charles metropolitan area for the next 2 years, with an option for Vance Properties to renew for an additional 3 years after that." My eyes widened. This was far bigger than I'd anticipated. The fee structure outlined, Isabel continued, would provide Apex, meaning you, with a very comfortable 6-figure base income annually. Significantly more than your Nexus salary, plus those performance bonuses tied to project milestones we discussed for the Plaza project. Applied across all projects. Wow, I breathed. And Nexus's role in all this? "Ah, that's the truly interesting part," Isabel said, and I could practically hear the smile in her voice. Clause 7b of the contract explicitly states that Vance Properties reserves the absolute right to select, approve, or reject any architectural or planning partners for their projects. There is absolutely no guarantee, stated or implied, that Nexus Architecture and Planning will remain involved with the Riverfront Plaza project, let alone be considered for any future Vance developments. I signed the contract electronically that afternoon, Isabel having confirmed all the terms were legally sound and highly advantageous. A strange mix of emotions washed over me, profound vindication, certainly, but also a surprising pang of melancholy. I hadn't set out with the deliberate intention of destroying Nexus. I had given 10 good, productive years to that firm, contributing significantly to its growth and success. But they, through Marcus's short-sighted actions, had made their choice. They had decided I was disposable, irrelevant. They had sown the wind. And now they were beginning to reap the whirlwind. By Thursday, the situation had indeed evolved dramatically, and the repercussions for Nexus were becoming increasingly clear. I received another call mid-morning from Leonard Finch at the City Development Permitting Bureau. "Abigail, you simply won't believe what's happening over here," he said, sounding both exasperated and slightly amused. "Marcus Thorne has been calling my office, and the director's office, practically every hour since Tuesday afternoon. He's desperately trying to find some loophole, some way around the Apex signature requirement for the plaza permits." When I patiently explained, for the 5th time, that the established protocol couldn't simply be bypassed, he actually had the audacity to suggest that our dinosaur procedures, as he called them, needed to be radically updated for the modern digital era. I couldn't help but laugh. "Oh, Leonard. I assume that comment went over well with the director." "About as well as a lead balloon in a hurricane," Leonard chuckled dryly. The director politely but firmly reminded Mr. Thorne that those dinosaur procedures are mandated by city ordinance to ensure public safety and regulatory compliance, not just bureaucratic whim. Then, Leonard added, clearly savoring the moment. The director asked him point-blank if Nexus Architecture and Planning was officially requesting to reject the established expedited review process facilitated by Apex Permitting Solutions for the Riverfront Plaza project. Thorne backpedaled so fast he nearly tripped over his own expensive shoes. Later that same day, I had my first official transition meeting with Julian Vance and his core project team at the Vance Properties headquarters. The atmosphere was professional, focused, and refreshingly devoid of the ego-driven posturing I'd grown accustomed to at Nexus. As we sat around the large conference table, reviewing the revised project timelines necessitated by the recent hiccup, Julian Vance made a stunning, matter-of-fact announcement. "For the record," he stated calmly, addressing his team but looking directly at me, "I have formally notified Nexus Architecture and Planning this morning that Vance Properties is terminating their contract for the Riverfront Plaza development, effective immediately." A collective intake of breath went around the table from his team members. Their gross mishandling of the permit process, culminating in the inexplicable termination of Ms. Hayes, the key personnel handling said process, demonstrates a fundamental lack of professional judgment and competence that I am simply unwilling to risk on a $42 million project. He continued coolly. "What about the architectural plans and designs they've already completed?" I asked, genuinely stunned by the swiftness and finality of his decision. It was one thing to reconsider the relationship, another to sever it entirely mid-project. "We have retained full ownership and rights to all plans, blueprints, and specifications developed to date, as stipulated per our original contract with Nexus," Julian explained smoothly. "There will be no issues there." He paused, then added, "Furthermore, I have already reached out to Sterling Design Group this morning. They have agreed to take over the architectural lead on the Riverfront Plaza project, honoring the existing core designs with some necessary modifications to reflect their own expertise." Sterling Design Group, Nexus's biggest and most respected competitor in Port Charles. The irony was sharp, almost painful in its perfection. Marcus had not only lost the contract, he'd handed it directly to his chief rival. "Now," Julian continued, turning to me with a confident smile, "the Nexus issues seemingly already dismissed from his mind, Abigail. Let's discuss how Apex Permitting Solutions can help us get this critical project back on track, efficiently and effectively. With your expertise leading our regulatory compliance efforts," he concluded, his gaze sweeping across his team, "I am entirely confident we can not only make up for lost time but potentially even accelerate the revised schedule." As the meeting progressed, shifting focus to detailed logistical planning and coordination between Apex and the Vance team, I felt a surge of energy. A renewed sense of purpose I hadn't realized I'd been missing. Just days ago, at 58, I had been summarily dismissed as irrelevant, the Grandma Abby, whose decades of experience supposedly no longer held value in the modern era. Now, I was the president of Apex Permitting Solutions, a key independent consultant on the most significant development project in Port Charles. Working directly with one of the city's most powerful and respected investors, with a multi-year contract encompassing all his future projects. Sometimes, I reflected silently as Julian's project manager outlined the next steps. Being fired isn't an ending. Sometimes, especially when your former employer has absolutely no idea what they're truly losing, it's the beginning of something far better. The headline splashed across the front page of Monday's Metro City Gazette business section was impossible to miss. Vance Properties drops Nexus planning from $42 million Riverfront Plaza project, cites critical permit mismanagement. Apex Solutions tapped to lead compliance. The accompanying article detailed, in fairly direct terms, how the city's landmark development project would now proceed under new architectural leadership Sterling Design Group, with the specialized firm Apex Permitting Solutions, led by industry veteran Abigail Hayes, handling all crucial regulatory compliance and city liaison aspects. There was even a direct quote attributed to Julian Vance himself: "In complex urban development, experience, established relationships, and meticulous attention to regulatory detail are paramount. We've brought in the best regulatory compliance specialist in Port Charles, Abigail Hayes and her firm Apex Solutions, to ensure this vital project proceeds smoothly and efficiently for the ultimate benefit of the entire community." But the best part? The absolute chef's kiss. Positioned prominently alongside the article was a small but clear photograph. It showed me standing beside Julian Vance and key members of his development team, inside the City Development Permitting Bureau offices. In the photo, my hand hovered over a tablet displaying the official bureau portal, my digital signature clearly visible. Finalizing the very Riverfront Plaza permits that had been hopelessly stalled just the week before. I carefully clipped the article and placed it in a file, right alongside the insulting termination notice Marcus Thorne had handed me just 10 short days earlier. The contrast couldn't have been more stark, more satisfying. From being fired with an insulting 3-week severance package and demeaned as a Grandma Abby, to being featured on the front page of the business section, lauded as the best regulatory compliance specialist in Port Charles's, and a key player on the city's most significant development project. My daughter, Olivia, called shortly after the Gazette hit the newsstands, her voice bubbling with excitement. "Mom, you're famous," she exclaimed. Front page. "And I just heard through the downtown grapevine, you know Sarah in accounting at Sterling? That Nexus architecture and planning is apparently in complete and utter disarray." "Oh." I tried to sound merely curious, maintaining a professional detachment, though a fierce surge of satisfaction coursed through me. "Apparently," Olivia continued, clearly relishing the secondhand news, "they've already lost 2 other major clients since Friday. Both expressed serious concerns about Nexus's ability to effectively navigate the city's permit process without you. Their reputation for competence is tanking." "And Chloe Bishop?" I asked, unable to resist inquiring about my replacement. "Get this," Olivia chuckled. "Sarah heard Chloe's been abruptly reassigned to a social media strategy and brand outreach, basically taken off all actual project work, after she completely botched trying to submit a basic zoning variance application last week. Couldn't figure out the forms." I couldn't help but smile at that. Social media strategy, perhaps that was, indeed, exactly what Chloe was qualified for, not the complex, nuanced regulatory work Marcus had foolishly tried to foist upon her immediately after firing the only person who truly understood it. "And it's not just the Riverfront Plaza contract they've lost, Mom," Olivia added, her voice dropping conspiratorially. "Julian Vance apparently has 5 other significant development projects in various stages across the city. And word is, he's pulled all of them from Nexus effective immediately. Every single one. She paused for effect. That's potentially millions in lost contracts and future revenue for them. That's business, Olivia, I replied simply, though the scale of the fallout was more significant than I'd anticipated. No, Mom, Olivia laughed heartily through the phone. That's not just business. That's karma. It's not karma, honey, I corrected her gently, though I understood her sentiment. It's simply the natural, predictable consequence of fundamentally undervaluing experience and expertise. 3 months later, I stood bathed in the bright June sunshine at the official Riverfront Plaza groundbreaking ceremony. I watched, feeling a profound sense of accomplishment, as Julian Vance, the mayor, and other city officials ceremonially turned the first shovels of gleaming dirt, marking the formal commencement of the project, a project now firmly back on track, thanks in no small part to Apex Permitting Solutions. My role had already expanded significantly beyond just regulatory compliance for this single project. I was now effectively Vance Properties' chief liaison with the city for all their ongoing and future developments. A senior strategic position Julian had created specifically to leverage my unique combination of technical expertise, political acumen, and long-standing relationships within Port Charles. Apex Permitting Solutions was thriving. As photographers from the Gazette and local TV stations captured the milestone moment, my eyes scanned the assembled crowd of dignitaries, investors, and community members. On the periphery, standing alone near the back, I spotted a familiar figure, Marcus Thorne. He looked diminished, somehow smaller, his usual confident swagger replaced by a distinct air of unease. He looked decidedly less self-assured than he had that Friday morning 3 months ago when he dismissed me with a smug strategic realignment. Grandma Abby. Our eyes met briefly across the crowd. A flicker of something, shame? Resentment? Crossed his face before he quickly looked away, unable or unwilling to hold my gaze. His discomfort was palpable, a silent acknowledgement of the profound miscalculation he had made. After the formal ceremony concluded, a young reporter from the Metro City Gazette approached me, requesting an interview for a follow-up feature. The resulting article, published the following Sunday under the headline, "The Permit Whisperer: How Abigail Hayes Became Port Charles's Most Sought-After Development Consultant," ran prominently on the front page of the business section once again. It wasn't just about Riverfront Plaza this time, it detailed my decades of experience in the industry, the deep respect I commanded from city officials and developers alike, and the increasingly critical role that expert regulatory compliance played in the success of complex urban development projects in a growing city like Port Charles. There was even a glowing quote from my old friend, Leonard Finch, at the City Development Permitting Bureau. Abigail Hayes knows more about Port Charles's zoning codes and permit requirements than anyone else in this industry, period. Developers who work with Apex Solutions consistently get their projects reviewed and approved in half the time, because she ensures everything is done right the first time. She's invaluable. My consulting business, Apex Permitting Solutions, expanded rapidly in the wake of that article. The phone rang off the hook. I soon realized I couldn't handle the workload alone. I hired 2 highly experienced assistants, both sharp, capable women in their late 50s who, I learned, had recently found themselves similarly sidelined or strategically realigned out of positions at other firms in favor of younger, less experienced hires. I also established a paid internship program specifically designed for individuals seeking to change careers or re-enter the workforce midlife, focusing on mentorship and practical skills development. I never actively sought to inflict further damage on Nexus architecture and planning. My focus was entirely on building Apex and serving my new clients. But I watched, with a certain detached, professional interest, as their fortunes continued to decline. Without access to the expedited permit channel facilitated by Apex, their remaining projects faced significant delays and cost overruns. Several other key clients quietly followed Vance Properties' lead and took their business elsewhere, primarily to Sterling Design Group. Marcus's much-touted, youthful, dynamic approach wasn't delivering the smooth, efficient results he had promised his remaining clients. Chloe Bishop, I heard through the grapevine, lasted only 6 more months at Nexus before leaving Port Charles entirely for a junior marketing position at a firm in another state. I genuinely wished her well when I heard the news. She was young, ambitious. Perhaps she had time to learn the hard lesson that flash without substance, that style without deep expertise, rarely leads to sustained success in the long run, especially in a field as demanding as urban development. As for me, at 58, I had unexpectedly embarked on the most professionally rewarding, financially successful, and personally fulfilling phase of my entire career. Not as someone else's undervalued employee, constantly looking over my shoulder, but as the respected principal of my own thriving company, the architect of my own success. Building a business founded on the very principles Nexus had discarded, valuing deep experience, embracing practical wisdom, fostering collaborative relationships, and never, ever dismissing someone as just a grandma. No, the best stage of my career wasn't behind me. It was just beginning, built on my own terms.